There was a time in Australia when a strange light in the sky was not just a curiosity, it was a file, a signal, a report to be logged. Not because the government believed in flying saucers, but because during the Cold War, in an age of aviation expansion, radar systems, weapon zones, and strategic uncertainty, anything unexplained in the sky could matter. Tonight, we go back into that archive. Not to the most famous cases, not to Westall, not to Valentich, but to three lesser known records that reveal something important about how Australia once handled the unknown. Tullamarine, Goulburn, and Townsville. Three cases, three different environments, one pattern. When the sky produced uncertainty, the system reacted. Welcome back to UFO to UAP, the Disclosure Report. I'm your host, Matt Tones, and today's episode is titled Inside the Australian UFO Archive Part 2, Tullamarine, Goulburn, and the Townsville radar case. These are three lesser-known files that help us understand something deeper about how Australia handled the UFO problem when it sat inside a military and aviation framework. This episode focuses on the Tullamarine case in Melbourne in 1966, the Goulburn case in 1954, and the Townsville radar case in 1978. Together, they give us three different lenses on the same phenomenon: controlled airspace, train witnesses, and radar uncertainty. And before we go case by case, the broader context matters. The National Archives of Australia makes clear that the government recorded possible UFO sightings largely because in the Cold War and space race era, unexplained things in the sky were treated as worth tracking for national security reasons. The RAAF documented reports, especially when ordinary explanations were not immediately obvious, even though most sightings eventually turned out to be aircraft, balloons, planets, meteors, or atmospheric effects. That is the frame for this episode. Not belief, not disclosure, but uncertainty management. Our first case is the Tullamarine incident in 1966. Let's begin with the most elusive of the three. The National Archives trail includes a file titled Unidentified Aerial Object 3-4-1966 Tullamarine. That places an unexplained aerial report at or around Tullamarine in Victorian Melbourne in 1966 and links it to the same general era in which Australia was actively collecting unusual aerial sightings. The archival trail also places it in a sequence of other RAAF intelligence and UFO-related files. What makes this file interesting is not that we have a full public narrative. We do not. What makes it interesting is the setting. Tullamarine is not remote bushland. It is not a lonely highway. It is not a schoolyard. It is aviation space. And in intelligence terms, that changes the meaning of any unidentified object report. Because once a case is linked to a major airport environment, the question is no longer just what did someone see? The question becomes, was something present in or near controlled airspace that could not be readily identified? Now, I need to be disciplined here. I did not find a strong public newspaper trail or a detailed National Archives narrative summary for this Tullamarine file, so I cannot honestly tell you the exact witness count, object description, or official conclusion from the file itself. What I can say is that the existence of the file shows the event was serious enough to be formally recorded as an unidentified aerial object near Tullamarine in 1966. This gives us the first intelligence takeaway. Tullamarine matters less for what we can currently prove about the object and more for what the file title itself implies: an unresolved aerial report in an airport context. Let's now step into case two, the Goulburn incident in 1954. Now, this time we move to the strongest of the three cases. The National Archives Trail includes a file titled Unidentified Objects and in brackets, flying saucers sighted by Navy pilot over Goulburn from 1954. This case is also corroborated by contemporary newspaper reporting and later archival researchers who examined the file directly. According to the pilot report quoted from the archival material, Royal Australian Navy pilot Lieutenant J.A. O'Farrell was on a night cross-country flight from Nowra when he observed a very bright light closing fast from his 1 o'clock position, then a second similar light at 9 o'clock. He radioed Nowra, asking whether radar could confirm other aircraft in the area, and was told that the radar had 3 echoes on screen. The pilot's account says the 2 bright lights then reformed and disappeared to the northeast. Contemporary newspapers' coverage strongly supports the core public outline. A Navy pilot reported 2 flying saucers over Goulburn, and radar of officers at Nowra picked up the objects on the screen. That is not folklore added decades later. That was in Australian newspapers in December 1954. This is one of those cases where the archival and media record reinforce each other in a meaningful way, and that matters because a lot of UFO cases grow in the telling. This one was already serious at the time. Trained military witness, night flight, radar corroboration, no easy dismissal. Now, does that prove something exotic? No. But in analytical terms, Goulburn is exactly the kind of case that survives because it has multiple credibility layers built into it. Even the National Archives' broader treatment of Australian UFO files says sightings by highly trained defense personnel were harder to dismiss than ordinary public reports. And that gives us the second intelligence takeaway from this episode. Goulburn is one of the better Australian archive cases because witness credibility and instrument corroboration intersect. As we step into case 3, the Townsville radar area in 1978, and it's the most modern of the 3, the archive trail includes a file titled Unidentified Flying Objects Townsville Radar Area, dated the 30 to the 31st of March 1978. A later publication built from Australian archival material describes it as a collection of radar observations of what may well have been unknown light aircraft. A more recent public summary of the document says multiple radar contacts were tracked near Townsville with speeds in the range of about 148 to 200 knots, and that at one point, a Beech Baron aircraft was dispatched in an attempt to intercept one of the contacts. The most important part of the Townsville case is the ending. According to the later summary of the document, the radar sightings were subsequently discussed against known aircraft, and the Department of Transport advised that aircraft on routes including Nandi to Sydney were accounted for at the relevant times. The summary also says the sightings were investigated and correlated with known aircraft, though it also preserves the fact that the contacts were initially treated as unidentified enough to generate a confidential RAAF message traffic. So Townsville is useful for a different reason than Goulburn. Goulburn survives because it remains difficult. Townsville survives because it shows the system working in real time. Radar paints, uncertainty, attempted intercept logic, later correlation with civil traffic. In other words, Townsville is not just a mystery case, it is a process case. It shows how unidentified tracks move through the military information system before later being pulled back toward a conventional explanation. That makes it highly valuable for an intelligence style look because it reveals not just the object problem, but the institutional response problem. That gives us the third intelligence takeaway. Townsville matters because it captures the transition from unknown contact to probable ordinary explanation inside a radar environment. What these 3 cases show together. Now let's step back. Tullamarine gives us the airport context case. Goulburn gives us the train witness plus radar case. Townsville gives us the radar processing case with later conventional correlation. 3 different cases, 3 different strengths. And what ties them together is this. Australia's UFO archive was never just about spectacular sightings. It was also about airspace, tracking, and uncertainty in operational settings. This is why the RAAF files still matter. Not because every file contains a great mystery, many do not. Some are weak, some are fragmentary, some were probably solved quickly. But taken together, they show that Australia once treated unusual aerial reports as something worth documenting, testing, and comparing against known traffic and natural explanations. And this episode also makes a second point, one that matters for researchers. Public access is uneven. Some cases, like Goulburn, can be reconstructed across archives, newsletter, and later analysis. Others, like Tullamarine, are visible mainly through the file trail itself, unless someone goes deeper into the original record. That unevenness is part of why the Australian archive still feels unfinished. So the cleanest summary of this episode is this. Tullamarine shows us the importance of airport context unidentified reports. Goulburn shows us one of Australia's stronger radar visual military cases. Townsville shows us how radar anomalies move through the systems and sometimes end in ordinary explanation. None of these cases prove extraterrestrial origin. All of them show that Australia's UFO history is richer, more procedural, and more aviation-centered than many people realize. This has been UFO to UAP, the Disclosure Report. I'm Matt Tones. Thanks for listening. Please subscribe, and don't forget to tell your mum about our podcast.